A lot of design and construction and engineering firms are concerned about their people, of course. Everybody says that our people are the most important thing we have in our organizations. And today, this is a discussion we're going to have about something called the JUST label. That comes from the International Living Future Institute. And we have representatives from two architecture firms that have achieved the JUST label from the ILFI. Those are Ankrom Moison and CallisonRTKL. And representing Ankrom Moison is Karis Ferguson. She's the Human Resources Manager there. Say hi. Hi.
Hello.
Karis. And we have Yarden Harari, an architect with an associate with CRTKL or CallisonRTKL. And we have Sean Hesse from the ILFI, who kind of manages the JUST program. So this is unusual, and it's a human resources oriented social equity. It's got a lot of different elements. Sean, give us kind of like a quick outline of why ILFI did this. You have your Declare, you have the Living the Living Buildings program. Why JUST?
Sure. Well, the JUST program is really, it was launched in 2014. Mm-hmm. And really it was intended to build, kind of deepen the way that ILFI works towards social justice and advancing restorative communities. Our vision is, we work towards a positive vision of a world that's socially just, culturally rich, and ecologically restorative. So all of our programs touch on that, but JUST is really the platform that puts that forward the most.
Mm-hmm. And I understand that the goals are kind of relate to social justice, improving HR policies, and making life better for employees. And you've got these 6 categories that set the framework, and then each one has a total of 22. There are a total of 22 special indicators. So what are the 6 categories that you have to go through to get a JUST label?
Yeah, there's 6 different categories that represent kind of different aspects of the way that an organization interacts with their employees and their community. So we'll look at diversity and inclusion of the workforce and also the kind of the leadership. There's an equity category that looks at payment and kind of financial elements. There's a section around employee health. There's one around employee benefits. And then we look at stewardship and the supply chain and the purchasing practices.
Very comprehensive. It's it takes in a lot of territory there, and specific items under each one of those that are quite intense. And you have to get a certain number. It's kind of like other certification programs that you have and others have, where you have to get kind of a total number of points, if you will, to achieve the label, isn't it?
Well, there's 22 different indicators, as you said, scattered across those 6 categories. And the way that we think about it, really more like a nutrition label for organizations.
Okay.
So, mm-hmm. There isn't really a minimum level of performance that's required on the JUST label. Organizations can score anywhere from level 1 to level 4 on each indicator. And those correspond roughly to kind of transparent minimum practice, all the way up to exemplary best practice.
Yeah. So it goes. It gets more and more intense as you go up, if you will. Okay. And you're now you've done some refinements. You're at 2.0 already. So
right.
So yeah. So I understand there's about more than 70 AEC firms that have achieved this, but let's talk to 2 of them today, Ankrom Moison and CRTKL. Karis, tell us what it was like. You're the HR manager there. How long did it take you? How much hair did you lose pulling it out doing this? Tell us all about it.
The process was actually pretty simple. It was time consuming to compile all of the all of our firm's current policies, refine some of those. We needed to run an engagement survey to pulse how our employees are feeling about certain areas of our firm and our policies. And then after you compile that, you analyze the data, and then you just send it into ILFI, and they shoot out your label.
Magically produce it for
you.
Okay.
Yeah.
But how long did it take you?
Probably took me like 3 weeks in total to get it all together, because you had to have time to run the engagement survey.
Yeah. So you do a survey of the employees to ask them specific questions that are required in the program. So Ankrom Moison has about 265 employees. You're kind of in the northwest primarily, and then we've got this giant firm, this humongous CRTKL, which has how many employees? 1,200 total across the globe in 20 different offices. So tell us a little bit about what it was like, Yarden, for you and dealing with a much, a bigger animal, if you will.
Yeah, and we started our Just Label for the US region. And so that was kind of a little bit of a way to get a bit smaller. But for us, the traction was ironically kind of grassroots, and it started small and then was a couple of different conversations that converged organically. And I think, it was pretty relevant for us around the Just Label was that along with evaluating our policies and practices, it really helped us connect the dots across all these different efforts that were going on, all these different people. So it helped us put together that bigger picture of all the things that our firm stands for. And so ironically for us as a large firm, the Just Label process was really a way to make a big firm feel small.
That's interesting. Yeah. How do you make because people, when you're in a big firm like CRTKL, do you connect? Are you really with your colleagues around the world? And I understand you had kind of 3 buckets that you were concerned about from the beginning. What were those buckets?
Yeah, so for us, a way to kind of channel our energy of how we were going about all the 22 indicators to give a little bit of sense around it was looking at some successes, kind of highlighting our strengths, and then establishing a stance where we might not have had a high level one, and then really improving process where maybe we were already tracking certain things, but didn't have like a consistent or firm-wide way of doing that.
Could you give me an example of one where you were, let's say, not doing as well as you'd like to have done, and where you were trying to improve that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the stewardship and supply chain, and maybe Sean could speak to, I think ILFI knew that those categories are where we could push the envelope as an industry. It was less internal. So for us, volunteering, we had never had a policy. People had always done it, lots of efforts had always happened, but we didn't have a clear process for how to necessarily go about that, to track, let alone know how we would give people hours to kind of use that time well. So I think that was definitely one where we were just oh, we do this, but it's kind of amorphous, and we wanted to make
I want to come back to Karis on that one. But Sean, what do you hear from other firms, other similar architectural, engineering, construction, design folks and construction? What are the parts of Just that they have a little bit more effort needed in?
It really depends, right? A lot of it depends on where firms are starting from.
Right.
But certainly, I think supply chain is one area that a lot of firms haven't really thought through very deeply in terms of what power they have as a contractor, right? The organizations that they do business with, the subcontractors that they bring into projects, and the ability that they have in that capacity to be able to drive a conversation around equity throughout the industry. So that's certainly an area that is pretty common.
It gets into things like animal care and all sorts of really unusual and interesting areas.
Yeah, and another area that I think a lot of firms run into early on is around diversity. In fact, that looking at their own the diversity of their own organization, Another arena is the pay scale equity, looking at pay parity, in fact, kind of across the organization.
Yeah.
One of my favorite examples of this is organizations make changes almost immediately as soon as they start looking at these things.
Is that right?
And one of my favorite examples is a firm that realized that they only had men on their compensation committee. And so they immediately made some changes.
Wow.
Right. And so it's a really powerful tool to help organizations, do that, kind of improve their own HR policies and improve their own performance.
Mm-hmm. Karis, what did you find to be an area where you were a little bit surprised at either how well you were doing or how well you were not doing?
Yeah, I think to kind of echo what both Sean and Yarden have said, I think stewardship and the purchasing and supply chain, everyone at our firm really does make an effort to do their best in those areas. But again, we didn't have anything written down necessarily, or it wasn't streamlined. So that's been a good area to say, okay, we really do need to focus on this and make sure that we are all operating under the same thing. I think if you
don't write it down, you can't measure it, can you? Right? Yeah,
right.
That's the old line, isn't it? Yeah.
I think where I have actually found it to be really helpful is I think that this is a great starting point, but it's not everything. So once you look at where you're scoring, you have to really dig deeper and say, okay, we didn't score that well in this area, but maybe that's because what we have in place doesn't quite meet the metric that's defined by ILFI. So that's really looking, taking an introspective look at is the way that they're scoring it, like, are we really that far off? And so in some areas we've seen, yes, we are far off. In some areas we've seen, no, we have this alternative option that is pretty powerful. And then as far as diversity, equity, and inclusion, we actually have implemented an entire firm-wide, really comprehensive DEI program this year. So that's something that we did score pretty well in those areas, but we are still wanting to make sure we score as well as possible the next round.
Yarden, I heard that you gave a talk to your whole organization recently about getting the just label, and that your closing remark was, "You can't flip the switch and walk away." This is an ongoing thing, isn't it? It's not just here's the document, we're good.
Yeah.
What did you find? What did you find about on that?
Yeah, exactly. I think for us, we were thinking about it as a springboard rather than like closing the chapter on the work of evaluation. So the just process helped us kind of peel back a layer, and like Karis was saying, kind of, okay, where do we land? How do we want to talk about this if we haven't measured it before, and what does it mean? And then now it's like, okay, let's go. And I think the response too was really sharing that ownership so that people felt empowered to take on different pieces of the puzzle. So I think for us, it was really making sure that this didn't kind of just live and die with the core team of it was 5 people that ran the process. So kind of the sustainability team, HR, and then myself, and kind of gender equity conversations.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Now there is cost involved. We're going to put up a chart showing what the fees are for doing this, because somebody's got to pay Sean and other folks. So I'll leave it to Sean. Any kind of conclusions here about what about some advice you would give? Maybe let's do, each one of you do 10 or 15 seconds on one piece of advice you would give for getting a just label. Who wants to take it first?
I can start.
Go ahead, Karis.
I would say take it, go with it. Really, you're just trying to figure out where your firm lands. That doesn't mean it's your ending point. You can only move forward if you know where you're at. And so don't get discouraged if you score badly in one area, I guess.
Yarden, any thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. I would build on that kind of one step at a time. And then also would say communication is part of the process. So I think just being able to share the work as you're doing it with people, so that it's not just like a surprise, we did this thing and people don't understand what it is. So I think
Sean, I'll give you a last shot here.
Sure. Well, I would just say everyone should know that ILFI is available as a resource to support organizations that have any questions, that are interested in learning more. The objectives for the label are really about elevating the conversation around social justice, and so we're available to engage in that conversation.
Well, one last point, ILFI was founded by one of our building design construction 40 under 40s, Jason McLennan, from many years ago. So we're very proud of that too. Well, we've had a terrific conversation here with Sean Hesse from the International Living Future Institute, Karis Ferguson from Ankrom Moison Architects, and Yarden Harari from CallisonRTKL. Thanks to all of you for your time.